Hey there, class. This is Mr. Pritz. In biblical narrative, we are primarily looking at three key parts of a story. Those three are characters, plots, and setting. A good story must have characters. Those characters must do something that would make up the plot, and they must do something in an environment, in a setting, and that's what a setting is. So for this presentation, we're going to talk about characterization. This will be one of the key methods of analyzing the biblical narrative throughout our studies, is going to be learning how to get to know characters in the Bible. So some basic vocabulary, and you don't need to memorize this, it's always here. I would recommend pausing this video to write all of these vocabulary words down in your notes. First, we have a story. A story must have characters, people or things doing something. Plot, what those things are doing. And setting, where those people or things are doing something. Stories have protagonist, central character, or the main character. An antagonist, characters in a story who are against the central character. Foil character, heightens another character through contrast or parallels. Sympathetic character is a character we identify with. An unsympathetic character is a character who is unengaging. A normative character embodies the standards, values, or norms that the story is offering for our approval. Satirical portrait is a character held up for ridicule or rebuke. Developing character is a character who changes during a story. We'll see a lot of that. And a static character is the character who stays the same during a story. So it's important to pay attention to the motivations of characters' actions in a story. Sometimes a story will tell us, sometimes they won't. If the story does tell us what motivates a character to act a certain way, make note of that. That's very important. The author wants us to know that. Pay attention to how characters transform during a story. Oftentimes a character will transform for the better or worse based off of their actions. So in order to understand whether a character is transforming or not, we have to make note of how the character is acting in certain settings and around certain people, and how that character may act towards God. And we'll continue to chart that out to see if that character is changing or not. And if the character is changing, make note of it. So let's look at a few ways that stories and writers of stories, storytellers, portray characters. The first way, the most basic way, is they present them directly through a description or assessment. So take this example, Genesis 25, 27 through 28. It says, when the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So this is a pretty obvious example. They're just describing these two characters, Esau and Jacob. Esau, a skillful hunter, Jacob, a quiet man. We'll also see the contrast in Isaac loving Esau and Rebekah loving Jacob. So don't you think, if the author is taking the time to present this to us in such a factual manner, that he wants us to get that? He wants us to understand these aspects of these characters. Unfortunately, this is rare in biblical writing. A more common way that stories and storytellers portray characters is that they present the character by showing how others respond to him or her. For example, in the story of Jacob and Esau, Jacob manipulates Esau and steals his inheritance, and this is Esau's response. Esau said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing." So, in Esau's response, he actually is highlighting certain aspects of the other character, Jacob. He's highlighting the fact that, well, he's greedy, he's unloving, and ultimately he's a cheater. He cheated his brother out of his inheritance. But we don't see that through a direct description from the author. Instead, the author shows us in how the other character, Esau, is responding to or about Jacob. And by the way, the name Jacob actually means cheater. A third way that stories and storytellers portray characters, they present the characters through their own self-realization, often shown through prayer. Read Jacob's description of himself as he prays to God. So this is later on in Jacob's life. After he cheated his brother, he says, I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. He's praying to God here. In this prayer, we see Jacob as a worshiper of God who has realized his own sin and unworthiness. This is one of the reasons why Jacob is one of my favorite characters in the Bible. Because while he had a rough go at it, he made a lot of bad decisions, did a lot of things he shouldn't have done, and he probably would have done differently. And he comes to this realization in this prayer before meeting his brother again. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love. He's saying, I am not worthy. He's come to a self-realization. It's almost a confession. And he's praying this to God. So we can see the development, the transformation of this character as he goes from greedy brother to confessing to God his sin. Most often, biblical stories present characters through their actions, either physical action, verbal action, or mental action. Verbal action, speaking or prayer. Mental action, thinking or inner thoughts. When Jacob single-handedly moves a giant stone from in front of the well, we don't need anyone to tell us that he has unbelievable strength. So in Genesis 29, it says, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. So we get this picture of a tough and rough guy, Jacob, strong in might and able to move this stone. You know, that's a very common way that the biblical authors are going to teach us about characters, is through their actions. So that's why observing their actions is so important. How can we get to know a character? Well, here's 5 ways. Through their actions, personal traits and abilities, through their thoughts and feelings, through their relationships and roles, through their responses to events or people. And again, this is all dependent upon how the author writes the story. And if you have noticed, this is exactly how we get to know people around us. We get to know people through their actions. You might think something of a person if they act in a certain way. That person is kind in the way they went up and treated that new student. Or their personal traits and abilities. You might say that person is fast. That person that person's athletic because you see them running. They might tell you their thoughts if you get to know them. You'll see them in their relationships with other people. And a really good way to get to know people is how they respond to events in their life, how they respond to world events, things they see on the news, things they see around us. So this is not uncommon for us to utilize the same tools we get to know people around us with how we get to know the biblical characters. And finally, some tips. Don't jump to conclusions. Just because a character makes a bad decision doesn't mean they can't change and develop as the story progresses. Remember, look how Jacob changed as a greedy man, greedy brother, to a confessing worshiper of God. So don't jump to conclusions. Allow the story to progress, allow the story to come to an end, and then make your conclusion. Take on an ancient imagination. This is difficult, but it's helpful to try and experience what the character is experiencing through your own imagination. A test of good literature is whether that literature can grasp your imagination enough to take you on a journey, to really experience what the character is experiencing. Characters alone don't make a story. We have to see them in relation to the plot and the setting. So in the other videos, we'll talk specifically about plot and setting. But for now, we are getting to know characters.